I never thought I'd have to defend my inheritance from my parents. But that's precisely what happened when they told me with coffee in hand and zero remorse that they'd be using my share to help Evan get back on his feet. It was a Sunday morning. We were in my mother's kitchen, still filled with the scent of cinnamon rolls she only ever baked when Evan visited. She looked me dead in the eye and said, "You've always been the responsible one, Clara. Evan needs this more," as if my years of sacrifice were convenient traits to exploit. Some betrayals don't come with screaming, they come with calm voices and pretty justifications. What they didn't know was that I had been planning for this moment ever since Grandma Rose took her last breath. Before delving into this story full of injustice, manipulation, and an ending they never saw coming, tell me, where are you watching from? And hit like if you've ever been called strong, so that others could be weak at your expense. They always said Evan had a special spark. I had good grades, a strong work ethic, and a job by 16, but Evan had charm. And in our family, the charm was currency. When he skipped school, it was he's just creative. When I got a B+, it was why not an A. I remember one 4th of July, Dad gave Evan a brand new mountain bike. I asked if mine had arrived late. He looked up from his beer and said, "Yours." "You're not the outdoor type, Clara." I was 13 and had saved up all summer for hiking boots. He didn't even ask. That same night, Evan crashed the bike into a neighbor's mailbox and laughed about it over burgers, while Mom applied bandages like he'd won a medal. I cleaned up the mess. No one noticed. This wasn't just favoritism, it was a pattern so old it wore grooves into my sense of self. Evan failed out of 2 community colleges, and each time he came home there was a barbecue. When I got accepted into the University of Oregon on scholarship, they sent me a congratulatory email. Not a party. Not even a dinner. At 23, Evan decided he wanted to start something big. A food truck. He couldn't cook, couldn't budget, but he had a logo. Dad co-signed a loan. I asked for help covering my CPA exam fees, just $800, and Mom said, "Honey, maybe it's not the right time." Evan defaulted in 6 months and blamed the weather. I passed my exams and got promoted within the year. They never asked where I worked. Evan had this way of making failure look like growth, and every time he crashed, they threw a net over him. I was the net. "Clara, can you help him put together a business plan? Clara, maybe you can tutor him on Excel." "Clara, don't be so cold, he's trying." No. He wasn't trying. He was performing. And they were his audience, clapping at every stumble as if it were art. Sometimes I wonder what it's like to be loved for who you are, not just for who people hope you'll become. The week before Grandma Rose died, Evan didn't show up once. I drove her to every appointment, held her hand through chemo, changed her linens, and managed her prescriptions. One evening, as I tucked her in, she whispered, "You've been the daughter I never had, even when your mother should have been one." That's when I knew she saw everything. And maybe she'd done something about it. I didn't know it then, but a storm was coming. And Evan. He was about to find out charm doesn't pay the bills when the will is in someone else's name. The last fall before Grandma Rose passed was the most beautiful I can remember. Burnt orange trees, crisp air, and a quiet that settled over her little house like a blanket. I moved in with her that September. Evan said he couldn't handle hospitals, and Mom said, "You're better with routines." What she meant was, we'd rather not be bothered, so I handled it. All of it. The medications, the appointments, the late-night cries when the pain got too sharp for pride. And through it all, Grandma Rose never lost her edge. She'd still correct my posture when I hunched over the pill box. "Chin up, Clara. Dignity isn't a luxury, it's armor." One night I was brushing her hair, thinning and silver, when she asked, "Do you know why I insisted you study finance?" I smiled, teasing. "Because you hate seeing women broke." She chuckled, then paused. "That too. But mostly because numbers don't lie. People do." That stuck with me. It always has. A week later, she was admitted to hospice care. Evan came by once and made a big show of carrying flowers and kissing her forehead. Then he cornered me in the hallway and asked, "Think she'll include me in the will? I could use a break." He winked. I wanted to slap the entitlement off his face. I stayed overnight every night that week. On the final one, she seemed more straightforward, her voice fragile but deliberate. She reached for my hand, and her fingers were still warm, like she hadn't let go of this world just yet. "Clara," she whispered, "I've arranged things to protect you. You're the only one who sees the long game. I didn't fully understand then." My throat tightened, but I nodded anyway. "I know what they'll try," she continued. "They'll make you feel selfish. They'll dress it up as love. Don't fall for it." "Promise me something," she said, eyes locked onto mine, unwavering. "You won't just keep the money. You'll keep the meaning. Don't let them turn what I built into just another bailout." I swore I would. She died at dawn. And when the nurse checked her pulse, I remember thinking, not with grief, but with clarity. Now it begins. The funeral was small. Evan wore sunglasses indoors and told everyone he was coping. Dad gave a speech that didn't mention me once. And Mom cried so hard you'd think she'd been the one by Grandma's side through every injection. They thought the story ended there. But I had a key, literally. A small brass one Grandma had tucked into my bag, with a note, "Use this when they try to rewrite the ending." And that was only the beginning. The will reading was scheduled for the following Monday, inside a tidy office with dark wood paneling and a view of the Columbia River. I walked in alone. Evan arrived 10 minutes late, wearing sunglasses again indoors as usual, and smelling like aftershave and a hangover. My parents came in last, looking put together and overly polite the way people do when they're pretending they didn't ignore a dying woman's final weeks. Calvin Mercer, Grandma Rose's attorney for over 30 years, didn't waste time. He looked at each of us, then opened the folder with practiced calm. Eleanor Monroe left behind a detailed and revised will last updated 4 months before her passing. My mother tilted her head. "Oh, we didn't know she made changes." "No one did," Calvin replied. At her request, this was kept private. That was the first crack. Dad leaned back in his chair. Evan rolled his eyes. I sat perfectly still. She divided her estate into 3 parts. Calvin continued. "The family home, valued assets, and heirlooms are all allocated under specific conditions." He paused. "To Evan Monroe," he said, glancing at my brother, "a restricted trust fund of $50,000 to be accessed only upon enrollment in an accredited educational program or the launch of a vetted business plan with oversight." Evan blinked. 50,000? "That's it." He leaned forward. "She had millions. What are you talking about? I'm her grandson." Calvin didn't flinch. She was explicit in her reasons. "The restrictions are non-negotiable." Evan scoffed. "That old woman lost her mind." Next, Calvin turned to my parents. To Richard and Marlene Monroe, she left a one-time disbursement of $10,000 for sentimental closure. My mother gasped. "That's insulting." She must have been pressured. Eleanor would never. "She updated this herself." Marlene Calvin interrupted, his voice calm but firm. "She handwrote the instructions 3 times. The room fell silent. All eyes turned to me. Calvin continued. "The remainder of the estate property investments, business assets, and heirlooms are placed into an irrevocable trust under the sole control of Clara Monroe." I didn't move. For clarity, he added, "Clara is the primary and exclusive beneficiary. These instructions cannot be challenged in probate court due to the trust's legal structure." My father stood up. "This is outrageous. Clara doesn't need the money, Evan does. Families share. This is un-American." "No, it was very American. Grandma Rose believed in consequences and preparation. She made this decision for a reason," I said quietly, finally breaking my silence. "She saw what you didn't." But what none of them saw, what would come next, was that I'd already gone one step further than they ever expected. And I was just getting started. The silence after the will reading didn't last long. By the time we got home, my mother had already rewritten the entire narrative in her head. She was confused, she said over dinner. She was old sick. That wasn't a sound decision. We were sitting at the same table where Grandma Rose used to host Sunday meals, roast chicken, mashed potatoes, rhubarb pie from her garden. Now it was just frozen lasagna and resentment. You know, my dad chimed in, tapping his glass of iced tea like it was a gavel. It's not too late to do the right thing. Share it evenly. That's what families do. Evan slouched at the end of the table with his sleeves rolled up to show off a watch he clearly couldn't afford, smirked. Grandma would have wanted us to stick together, Clara. Not hoard everything. That word hoard hit me like a slap. I looked around the table and realized they weren't grieving. They were strategizing. This wasn't about love or legacy. This was a negotiation, and I was the reluctant bank. For weeks it didn't stop. Texts from my mother. We're struggling to cover the mortgage this month. Just a little help. Calls from Dad Evans trying so hard, Clara. He needs one more shot. Even emails with Bible verses about generosity. Evan sent me an article titled, "Siblings Who Share Inheritances Build Stronger Families." No message, just the link. They turned Grandma's memory into a weapon, a tool to guilt me into surrendering. And yet, not once did anyone ask how I was holding up, how it felt to bury the only person who ever believed in me without reservation. They didn't see a woman in mourning, they saw a vault. One afternoon, I stood in the backyard of Grandma's house, the house I now owned, and remembered her voice. They'll dress it up as love. Don't fall for it. So I didn't. I drafted a formal statement through Calvin outlining that the trust would remain untouched, that I intended to honor every stipulation, that I wasn't open to discussions or reallocation. I even had it notarized just in case. They responded exactly how I expected, cold silence wrapped in passive-aggressive pity. She's changed, my mother told my aunt at church. Money's made her bitter. No, grief made me honest, but the more complex they pushed, the more I knew I had to protect everything Grandma Rose had entrusted to me, because the next move they made wouldn't be emotional. It would be strategic. And so I gave them what they wanted, a family meeting. Only this time I'd be the one holding the agenda. The invitation came via text, like most manipulations do nowadays. Family dinner Sunday night. Let's talk things through like grown-ups. No subject line, no context, just assumption. I knew what it was. A setup. Not a dinner, a stage. So I prepared. I didn't just pick out a dress, I picked a role. I brought wine war pearls and smiled like I didn't know better. If they wanted the good daughter, the forgiving sister, I'd give them the version they wanted for now. The table was dressed up like we were celebrating something. Evan was already pouring himself a second glass. Dad carved roast beef with flair as if it meant something. Mom lit candles. They were trying to create a Norman Rockwell painting. I was waiting for the cracks in the canvas to appear. It came fast between the mashed potatoes and the second toast. Evan leaned back and said, "So, Clara, I've been thinking. Maybe we pool the inheritance. Start something for the family. A fund? A legacy?" I tilted my head. "A family fund, yeah." He nodded. "Like a shared investment vehicle. We could hire someone to manage it. Maybe me." Mom chimed in. "You're so busy with your job, sweetie. Let Evan handle the details. You can stay informed. Stay informed as if I hadn't graduated with honors in finance. Like I hadn't built my career from scratch." But I didn't flinch. I sipped my wine and asked, "Interesting. Could you send me a proposal?" Evan raised an eyebrow. "It doesn't have to be formal. We're family, exactly." That's when I reached under the table and hit record on the voice memo app on my phone. If they wanted to turn this into a business, I would treat it like one. Every word, every nudge, every suggestion to let Evan manage it. All of it documented. Because they weren't planning a legacy. They were staging a takeover. And somewhere between dessert and Mom suggesting I relocate closer to home, I excused myself, walked into the kitchen, and forwarded the recording to my attorney. I came back with refilled wine glasses and a warmer smile. Let them believe I was softening. Let them believe I was folding. But what they didn't know was that I wasn't just smiling, I was strategizing. Because when people show you their intentions over dinner, you make sure dessert isn't the only thing you take with you. What they served me that night was manipulation on a silver platter. But what I served back would take them months to digest. And the next bite, it would come with proof. A week after the dinner, I got a call from a mutual friend, Danielle, someone Evan had once tried to impress with a half-baked tech startup pitch. She sounded hesitant, almost embarrassed. "Clara, I think you should know something. Evan's been talking. A lot. About the inheritance. About investments." I kept my voice calm. What kind of investments? Crypto, penny stocks, unregulated hedge funds, and Evan had already spent, or more accurately lost, over $200,000. I hung up and immediately started digging. It didn't take long. Evan's digital footprint was about as subtle as a marching band. His LinkedIn had a new title: Managing Partner, Monroe Legacy Ventures. No business license, no team. Just a logo and big promises. His Twitter was worse: screenshots of trades memes about diamond hands and a pinned tweet that read, "Scared money don't make money." Except, it does. It preserves it. It protects legacies. So I reached out to Calvan. We reviewed the trust terms again. My control was airtight. But what Evan had done was more than reckless, it was strategic deceit. He'd used his limited portion of the disbursement, taken advances from our parents under pretenses, and funneled them into short-term speculation. He called it rebuilding. I called it what it was: gambling. I scheduled a lunch with my parents at a neutral location. Friendly tone. I even brought cookies from their favorite bakery. And then I laid it out. Evan has already lost more than $200,000. He's not investing. He's playing. And you're backing his delusion with money you don't have. Mom blinked. "That can't be true. He says a lot." I cut in calm but firm. But truth doesn't come from hope. It comes from facts. I pulled out a folder. Bank statements, screenshots, transfers, tweets. Dad stared at the table. Mom's lips trembled, not with grief but with anger. At me, not him. "You've been spying on your brother?" she asked, voice sharp. "No, I've been protecting what Grandma entrusted to me, what she knew you'd all try to dismantle." They didn't respond, but I could see it, the doubt. The crack in the illusion that Evan was just misunderstood. Still, I knew they wouldn't turn on him. Not yet. Not publicly. Not until it hurt them personally. But that hurt was coming. Sooner than they realized. Because what I'd found next wasn't just carelessness, it was criminal. And I wasn't going to keep it quiet. It was a Tuesday morning when I caught her. Not red-handed, no smoking gun. It was just a conversation she didn't mean for me to hear on speakerphone in her car parked outside a boutique cafe where she thought I wouldn't show up early. I was supposed to meet her for brunch, neutral ground, after our tense lunch about Evan's financial disaster. I arrived 10 minutes ahead of schedule, walked up behind her sedan, and came to a halt. "She'll cave eventually," my mother was saying. Her voice was clipped, matter-of-fact. Clara's always been obsessed with control. This trust thing is just another phase. Once Evan gets something concrete to show her, she'll hand it over. She wants to be the savior. I stepped back, heart racing. That's when it hit me, this wasn't just about money. It never was. It was about power, about who got to define the family story. My mom had spent years grooming me into the responsible one, the overachiever, the fixer, not out of pride, but convenience. I was useful when I made things easier. But love, no. That was Evan's job. He got affection. I got assignments. And now that I held the reins of Grandma Rose's legacy, she couldn't stand it. She didn't want the money. She wanted the narrative back. A legacy where Clara was a footnote and Evan was the phoenix. The redemption arc. The golden sun who fell and flew again. I walked into the cafe anyway. She smiled like nothing had happened. "I ordered you chamomile. Thought you could use something calming." "I overheard your call," I said, sitting down. "Nice plan." The smile flickered, then returned like a well-rehearsed act. "Clara, honey." "What are you talking about?" "I'm talking about your strategy. about how I'm supposed to cave once Evan shows a little initiative. Her fingers tightened around the mug. You misunderstood. I'm trying to help him grow. That's what mothers do. No, I said, meeting her eyes. What mothers do is protect their children. All of them. Not just the ones who break things. She didn't respond. She just stared, eyes narrowing, lips pursed like she was calculating her next move. That's when I realized this wasn't about Evan either. Not really. It was about Grandma Rose. She'd chosen me, she'd trusted me, and in doing so, she'd exposed every crack my mother had spent a lifetime trying to paint over. I stood up. We're done pretending this is about family, I said. From now on, I play this like a business, and you're on the outside. But I knew this wasn't over. Because there was still one place left that might hold more answers than I was ready for. Grandma's old safe. I didn't open the safe right away. It sat at the back of Grandma's closet behind an old cedar chest and boxes of faded winter coats. I found it a few days after the brunch with my mother after I'd cut off all contact. The brass key she'd slipped into my bag months before the one I thought was just a token fit perfectly. I paused before turning the lock. I don't know what I expected, cash, maybe jewelry, but it wasn't valuables inside. It was paper. Dozens of envelopes yellowed at the edges, tied together with a blue ribbon. Each one was handwritten in the same careful cursive I'd watched Grandma write grocery lists with. They were all addressed to me. The first was dated 10 years ago. Clara, it began, if you're reading this, then I've passed and your hands are shaking. I know how heavy truth can feel, but I also know how strong you are. I sank to the floor of the closet and kept reading. Each letter was a map of the years we'd lived in parallel, but rarely truly together. She wrote about watching my mother minimize me in front of neighbors, and about how Evan always seemed to fail upward. About Thanksgiving, she overheard my parents mocking my boring little accounting job, while Evan bragged about a business pitch he never followed through on. But the most gutting letter was the one from the year I turned 25. Your mother asked me to sign over power of attorney. For Evan's sake, she said. I refused. That's when they stopped visiting. She'd seen everything, even the things I didn't want her to. One line hit me harder than the rest. They don't resent what you have, Clara. They resent that you earned it. I didn't cry. Not then. I felt steady. It was like someone had handed me the armor I didn't know I'd been wearing all along. The last envelope wasn't a letter. It was a printed document dated, notarized, and signed. A backup copy of the trust, the same version Calvin had read aloud, and stapled to the back photos. Photos of Evan drunk and yelling in her driveway. My mother rifling through Grandma's medicine drawer. My father taking pictures of the paperwork. She wasn't just protecting me in death. She'd been gathering evidence in life. I closed the safe and stood up slowly. This wasn't just about inheritance anymore. It was about legacy. About truth. And if they wanted to drag me through shame and guilt, they'd better prepare to walk through the fire Grandma left behind. Because now I had more than words. I had proof. And I was going to use it. The invitation came as a group email with the subject line, Family Discussion. Let's reset. It reeked of management speak, like they were trying to rebrand betrayal as communication. It was from my father. Sent at 3:12 a.m., which told me everything I needed to know. Guilt doesn't keep regular hours. The meeting was scheduled for the following Saturday at the house where I grew up. They even offered to cook dinner, Mom's famous pot roast, a peace offering wrapped in carrots and potatoes. But I wasn't walking into a peace offering. I was walking into a trap. Still, I said yes, because I wanted to see how far they were willing to go. I arrived early, not out of nervousness, but in control. The kitchen was spotless. Mom had set the table with the good china stuff she only used for Easter, or when the pastor came over. Evan was already there, wearing a blazer and fake humility. Dad handed me a glass of wine as if it were communion. We want to start fresh, Mom said, folding her hands like a school principal. There's been a lot of tension. Misunderstandings. Mistrust, Evan added, eyeing me over his glass. I stayed quiet. Let them perform. Then the pitch came. Dad pulled out a printed packet. Yes, a packet titled Monroe Family Holdings Proposal for Joint Oversight. It was a full-on business proposal. They wanted me to surrender the management of the trust to a family board. 3 votes, Mom, Dad, and Evan. I could advise, of course. They even highlighted that in yellow a generous consolation prize for the woman who had carried everything. Clara, Mom said, voice syrupy sweet, this isn't about control. It's about unity, about making Grandma's legacy something we all share. I smiled, because I finally saw it for what it was. This wasn't about money. This was about erasing me from the story and replacing responsibility with illusion. Rewarding failure with power, so I leaned forward, pulled out a folder from my bag, and laid it on the table. Photos, letters, audio recordings. The temperature in the room dropped 10 degrees. If you want to talk about legacy, I said, let's start with the truth. No one touched their wine. No one moved. Because they knew. This wasn't just a refusal. This was a warning. And I wasn't finished. There was still one move left. And it wouldn't just expose them. It would change everything. After the family meeting ended in silence, I drove straight to Calvin's office. I needed clarity, not reassurance, not comfort, just facts. He greeted me with his usual calm, offered coffee, and didn't ask questions. I handed him the folder with the proposal my family tried to push across the dinner table and said, "Tell me where I stand." Calvin nodded, opened the trust document, the real one, the one Grandma Rose had crafted with surgical precision, and began flipping through the clauses like a surgeon reading a patient's chart. Page 12, Section 4. Subclause B, there it was. In the event of undue pressure, coercion, or manipulation from any party toward the sole beneficiary said, beneficiary reserves the right to dissolve all shared assets and execute full liquidation with exclusive discretion, without notification. I stared at the sentence. One clause. One paragraph. Hidden in plain sight. And it changed everything. Clara, Calvin said, looking up, she gave you a weapon, not just a shield. I sat back in the leather chair, stunned. They thought they were playing a game of persuasion. However, the truth was that Grandma had predicted their every move. The dinners, the guilt, the faux legacies. She knew they'd try to rewrite her ending, and she gave me the ink to write it back. The clause meant I didn't have to include them in anything. Not only that I could remove any symbolic gesture she'd left behind, anything that could be twisted into a rightful claim. That included the house, the heirlooms, even the photos. She trusted you, Calvin said, his voice steady. Enough to give you not just ownership, but judgment. My fingers tightened around the edges of the paper. I wasn't just holding legal power, I was holding history. And I finally understood why it felt so heavy. Because it was never just money they wanted. It was the story. The story where I was invisible, where Evan rose from ashes, he lit himself. Where my parents were saints who just did their best. But now the narrative belonged to me. I left Calvin's office with one copy of the clause tucked in my coat pocket, and one decision echoing in my chest. I was going to use it, but not in private, not quietly. If they wanted to drag me through manipulation in front of witnesses, then they'd get their answer the same way, publicly. And the perfect stage was coming. It's just 1 week away. The gaslighting didn't come as a tidal wave. It started with a ripple, a text from my mother. "Are you feeling okay, Clara? You've been acting tense. Maybe you should talk to someone, subtle, polite, wrapped in concern." Then came Evan, leaving a voicemail with that overly calm tone abusers learn to master. "I'm worried about you, sis. All these harsh decisions. They don't sound like the Clara I grew up with. As if he'd grown up beside me at all." I ignored it, but the shift was clear. I wasn't just the enemy now, I was unstable, unreasonable, hysterical. The oldest tool in the family dysfunction playbook questioned the sanity of the one who finally says enough. At first, I kept it to myself. But then the neighbors started calling. "Hey, Clara," Mrs. Delaney from next door said gently one morning. "Your mom stopped by. Said you were overwhelmed. That maybe you needed help managing things. Help." This didn't help. It was reputation sabotage, preemptive damage control in case I used my full power. They were laying the groundwork to make me look like the problem. Again. So I changed course. I started documenting everything. Every message, every voicemail, every thinly veiled accusation. Did they want to play emotional chess? I brought receipts. Then came the birthday brunch. A family friend invited me not knowing I was being set up. I walked in smiling only to find my mother already seated, dabbing her eyes with a napkin like a character in a bad soap opera. "She's not herself lately," she told the table. "Ever since her grandmother passed, Clara's just hardened." Someone offered me a mimosa. I declined. And then I said loud enough for the table to pause. "Grief doesn't harden people. Gaslighting does." My mother froze. I didn't stay for pancakes. That afternoon, I sent a short email to the entire extended family. Attached were the trust clause, the notarized documents, and a message. "This isn't about pain or confusion. This is about control. And I'm not handing mine over." The responses ranged from silent to stunned. But one cousin, Alicia, someone I barely knew growing up, replied, "Good for you." They tried the same with my dad's will. "Let me know if you ever need backup." I realized then I wasn't alone. This wasn't just about my family. It was a pattern, a playbook. But if they thought I'd break under pressure, they forgot one thing: diamonds are made under pressure. And I was just getting started. It was the third time that week I'd found fresh footprints in Grandma's garden beds, just deep enough to show someone had wandered through the yard, too lazy, or entitled to stay on the stone path. I assumed it was Evan. Maybe Mom snooping after church. But what I didn't expect was a knock at my door the next morning, followed by the frail figure of Mr. Jennings, Grandma's next-door neighbor of 40 years. He clutched his cap in his hands like a boy summoned to the principal's office. "Clara, can we talk?" I led him to the porch. He wouldn't sit. Just stood, eyes darting toward the fence. "I should have told you this earlier," he said, voice dry like gravel. "But I didn't want to get in the middle." "Middle of what?" He sighed. "Your mom and Evan. They came by a lot more than you know, mostly when you were away for school. Always when your grandma was asleep or not feeling well." He glanced over his shoulder and lowered his voice. "One time, they brought a notary." My blood turned cold. "What were they trying to sign?" He swallowed. "That's just it. I asked your grandma later. She said they wanted her to change something in the trust. Said she told them no, and that she'd never forget it." I felt my hands clench that clause. Grandma must have added it right after that. I heard yelling once he went on. From Evan. Called her senile. Told her she was ruining the family. It all made sense now, the guilt, the desperation, the need to gaslight me into silence. They'd tried and failed to manipulate her. And when they couldn't rewrite her decisions in life, they set their sights on rewriting them in death. Mr. Jennings looked down at his shoes. "I thought I was doing the neighborly thing, staying out of family matters. But after your mom came by last week asking me to remind you of your mental health history, I knew I had to say something. So the smear campaign ran deeper than I thought." I thanked him, not just for the truth, but for the courage it took to speak it finally. That night I pulled out a fresh notepad and started drafting. Not just a legal strategy, a public one. Because it was time for people to hear what my family was really like. And I knew exactly where to begin, with the notary. I sat across from Calvin Hart, pounding louder than the ticking antique clock in his office. After Mr. Jennings's confession, I knew I had to follow the paper trail. So I'd asked Calvin Grandma's estate attorney, and my most trusted ally, to dig through everything. Every revision, every amendment, every witness's signature. He placed a folder between us thicker than it had been the last time. "I've gone through all of it," he said, "including the supplemental documents from 2 years ago, the ones your grandmother added after that notary incident Mr. Jennings mentioned." He slid out a set of documents flagged in red. "She was smart," Calvin said. "Too smart for them." The supplemental file included an audio transcript. Grandma had asked Calvin's paralegal to document a verbal statement under oath, her explanation of why she refused to change the trust. The file was simple yet crystal clear. "They tried to pressure me. My daughter said Evan needed the money to fix his life, that I was playing favorites. But Clara has never asked for anything. She's earned everything she has, and that's why I trust her." I didn't know whether to cry or laugh. But Calvin wasn't finished. "There's something else." He turned to the final page, a notarized witness statement. Not just from Grandma, from the notary herself. She'd submitted it voluntarily. It confirmed that Evan and my mother attempted to bring unsigned revisions to a meeting and pressured her to notarize them without Grandma's consent. When the notary refused, Evan got aggressive. Grandma sent them away and called Calvin the next morning. It wasn't just emotional manipulation anymore. This was attempted fraud. Calvin's voice dropped. "Clara, this statement alone could legally bar them from contesting the will if you choose to file it. It hit me then, every reconciliation dinner, every backhanded message from my mother, every passive-aggressive social visit, it was all a performance. They were buying time, hoping I wouldn't look too closely, hoping the weight of being family would make me stay silent. But Grandma had prepared me for this. She'd left me the tools, the evidence, the words. And now I had something better than leverage. I had the truth, in writing, on tape, and legally binding." I looked at Calvin, steadied my voice, and said, "Let's make it official. File everything." Because this wasn't just about setting boundaries anymore. This was about holding people accountable. And the moment I walked out of that office, I knew they were going to feel the consequences. I first learned about the donation from a local news article. A photo of Evan grinning like he'd just invented compassion was front and center under the headline, "Local Entrepreneur Donates $25,000 to Literacy Nonprofit." I almost choked on my coffee. Evan didn't have $25,000. He barely had credit, and that nonprofit. It was the same one Grandma used to volunteer at every Wednesday back when she could still walk to Main Street without a cane. The article quoted him saying, "This was important to my late grandmother. I'm just continuing her legacy." My fists clenched. It wasn't just a lie, it was a theft of memory. He was laundering his image through her kindness, hoping the community would forget everything else. And worse, he was using that donation to reposition himself publicly. To appear legitimate, probably hoping it would grease the wheels with banks, realtors, and even the court of public opinion. But I'd learned how to play this game. I called the nonprofit. A warm woman named Jody picked up. I introduced myself and asked if Evan's donation had come with any conditions. Her voice dropped. "Actually, yes," she said. He requested that the reading room be named after him and his family legacy. But when we started our due diligence, some flags came up. "What kind of flags?" I asked, notebook ready. "Well," she said carefully, "we found out the trust he referenced wasn't in his name. We contacted the estate attorney, listed Calvin Monroe." I smiled. "That's my attorney." Silence. Then, "Oh, that makes sense now. Turns out the check Evan submitted was drawn against a private credit line he'd opened in the name of the family trust. He was impersonating authority. Fraud. Again. I had the email exchange Jody offered to forward. The timeline. The fake signature he used. It all pointed to the same truth. Evan wasn't just trying to rewrite family history. He was trying to turn Grandma's legacy into his launch pad, and I wasn't going to let him. That evening, I met with Calvin and submitted the documentation. A second fraud claim was now on the table. But more importantly, I sent the whole file, including the news article, the check image, and the forged authorization, to every major donor Grandma had ever worked with. If Evan wanted to ride her coattails, he was about to get dragged in full view of the public. Next up, a community gala Grandma helped build for 20 years, where Evan was now scheduled to give a speech. He had no idea who would be in the audience, or what was about to be revealed. The courtroom smelled like pine-scented floor polish and old paper, a strange mix of cleanliness and decay. I stood in the hallway outside, hands, steady eyes locked forward. I wasn't afraid. I was ready. Evan walked in 10 minutes late, adjusting his tie as if he were heading to a job interview. My mother trailed behind him, clutching a manila folder like it held her last shred of control. When they saw me seated next to Calvin, calm, prepared, unmoved, they paused. For a split second, I saw something rare in Evan's eyes. Doubt. The judge, a gray-haired woman with glasses that slid down her nose, called our case. It wasn't a criminal trial yet. But this was the civil hearing to decide whether Evan had breached the terms of the trust. Calvin opened strong. He presented the notary's sworn statement, the charity fraud documentation, the timeline of forged communications, and finally Grandma's audio-recorded declaration of intent. My mother fidgeted. Evan smirked, but then the judge leaned forward. "Mr. Evans," she said, "you attempted to alter the provisions of a legally binding trust without beneficiary consent, and leveraged that claim to secure a financial donation under pretenses." He tried to spin it, blamed confusion, grief, poor memory. "Your Honor." I thought the trust was. She cut him off. "You thought that's not a legal defense." The gallery was small, mostly filled with strangers, but one face caught my eye. Alicia, my cousin, seated quietly in the back. She nodded when I met her gaze. That tiny nod gave me more strength than Evan's entire performance could shake. The judge paused the hearing for deliberation. When she returned, her voice carried weight. "Given the presented evidence, I am authorizing full beneficiary discretion to Ms. Clara Miller, per the Trust's protective clause. Furthermore, this court recommends a review of potential criminal conduct regarding fraudulent financial claims made by Mr. Evans Miller." My mother gasped. Evan looked like he'd been slapped. I didn't smile. I didn't gloat. I nodded. The gavel fell. And with that, the script they'd written for me, obedient daughter, silent supporter, family doormat, was shredded. We exited into the cool spring air. Calvin offered a quiet, "Well done." I said nothing. Because the real performance wasn't over. The community gala was just days away. Evan still thought he'd take that stage. But this time, he wouldn't be the one with the mic. The day after the courtroom ruling, I received a voicemail that made my breath catch in my throat. "Clara, this is Maria. I was your grandmother's caregiver. I think it's time we talked." I remembered Maria, well, soft-spoken, always in scrubs with a thermos of peppermint tea. She'd taken care of Grandma during those final fragile months. And though our paths had only crossed a few times, I never forgot the way Grandma smiled when Maria entered the room. We met the next morning at a quiet diner. Maria slid into the booth, eyes gentle but heavy with something unsaid. I was going to stay out of it. She started, fingers tightening around her mug. "But after the hearing, I knew you deserved to hear it." She reached into her purse and pulled out a small leather-bound notebook. "She gave this to me," she said. "Told me to keep it safe if anything ever happened." Inside were pages of Grandma's handwriting, neat, slanted, unwavering notes about her medications, appointments, and even who came to visit. But deeper in the book were dated entries that chilled me. March 12th. Evan showed up again. They asked me to reconsider the trust. I got angry when I refused. Said I was choosing a stranger over my son. March 15th. Linda called 3 times, said Clara was too busy to care about old women and houses. I told her Clara works full-time and still checks in weekly. Linda hung up. Maria flipped to the final page. April 3rd. If anything happens to me, Clara is to have everything, not just money peace. Let her live without guilt, without them. My throat tightened. She told me, Maria said softly, that you were the only one who ever visited just to sit. Not to fix things, not to ask for money, to be with her. We sat in silence, the weight of those words wrapping around us like a blanket of memory and grief. Then Maria added, "If you need me to testify for any reason, I will." I nodded, overwhelmed. "Thank you. I don't think we're done yet." Evan wasn't just a liar. He was a manipulator who had twisted our mother into a weapon and tried to smear me into silence. But I had Grandma's voice now, in ink, in memory. And next I'd make sure the world heard it too, starting with a speech no one expected me to give. At the gala, in front of everyone who still believed Evan was the golden boy, the verdict made headlines the next day. Court grants sole control of Miller Trust to granddaughter fraud allegations loom over family heir. I sat alone in my living room, the article open on my laptop, the morning sun spilling across the floor, like a silent witness. For the first time in months, I took a deep breath. It wasn't just a legal win, it was validation that I hadn't imagined the betrayal, that Grandma's faith in me hadn't been misplaced. But what came next wasn't peace, it was fallout. Mom's calls came first, voicemails laced with disbelief and bitterness. "You've humiliated your brother. Do you even understand what you've done?" Evan's silence was more telling than her rage. He vanished from social media. He canceled his gala appearance. Word in town was that the nonprofit quietly returned his donation and replaced the plaque with Grandma's name. Justice in inches. Still not everything settled cleanly. Some cousins reached out to say they had no idea. Others stayed quiet. One even emailed me, "You didn't have to go that far." But how far is too far when someone tries to erase you? The trust was now mine to manage. Grandma's home, her investments, even the little things, her journals, the rosewood box that once sat on her mantel. They came to me like whispers from the past, reminders of what mattered. And in all that silence, I found clarity. This fight had never been about money. It was about narrative. About not letting them tell the story of who I was and who she had been through their distorted lens of entitlement and guilt. The day after the court ruling, I stood on Grandma's porch. Maria joined me holding a box of envelopes. She wrote these for her book club friends, she explained. Said if anything ever went down, they should know the truth. We mailed each one together. Every small truth chipped away at the myth Evan had built. And that was only the beginning. Because while the legal fight was over, the emotional reckoning was beginning. In a town like ours, image was everything, and Evan's was about to shatter completely. One final step remained my public speech, a tribute to Grandma, but also a revelation. The gala was set. The microphone would be mine. And this time no one would interrupt. The gala evening arrived with a chill in the air and stars pricking through the velvet sky. As I stood backstage waiting to be called up, I watched the crowd filter in. Familiar faces filled the rows, neighbors, church members, teachers, and even the town mayor. And at the back, seated quietly in a beige suit, was Evan. Not center stage, not holding court. Just there. When the MC introduced me as Clara Miller, granddaughter of the late Rose Miller, and trustee of the Miller Foundation, polite applause followed. I stepped up to the microphone, my heart thudding, my breath steady. I'm not here tonight to list what I inherited, I began. I'm here to share what I learned. I talked about Grandma's resilience, how she taught me value wasn't measured in dollars but in decency, how she made every person feel seen, not for what they could give her, but simply for who they were. I told the crowd how silence had once kept me safe, but nearly buried the truth with it. I was told to share, I said, voice clear, but sharing doesn't mean surrender. Restoration matters more than revenge. A hush fell. I don't want what was taken from me, I continued to be used to hurt others. I want it to help people like her. Like Maria. Like you. I announced the Miller Foundation would provide grants for caregivers, those often ignored, underpaid, and overlooked. It wasn't about spite. It was legacy redefined. and then I paused, looking straight at Evan. Some people believe power is inherited, but Grandma believed it's earned? A few gasps, a smattering of knowing nods. I left the stage to quiet applause. Not thunderous, but respectful. Real. Outside, as guests mingled, Alicia hugged me tight. She would have been proud. I think so too, I whispered. From the corner of my eye, I saw Evan exit alone, head low. No entourage, no applause, just a man exposed undone by his ambition. But I didn't feel triumphant in the way I'd once imagined. I felt free. Back home, I lit one of Grandma's rose-scented candles and sat in her old armchair. I pulled out her journal and ran my fingers over her writing. There was peace in knowing I hadn't just fought back. I'd rebuilt. And tomorrow would be mine to shape with no one else's permission. That night after the gala, I returned home to find a small envelope wedged in the front door. No name, no return address, just my name and delicate handwriting I'd recognize anywhere. Grandma Rose. Inside was a single page yellowed slightly at the edges, her scent faint on the paper lavender and ink. Dear Clara, it began. If you're reading this, it means you chose truth over ease, legacy over silence. I knew it would be hard for you, harder than it ever was for Evan. Not because you weren't strong, but because you were never permitted to be. You had to take it. And if you did, then you've already become the woman I always saw in you. I sat at the kitchen table, tears clouding my words. This wasn't a letter for comfort, it was a final blessing. Her way of saying, you were never invisible to me. For so long I had carried the weight of being the responsible one, the overlooked one, the one they leaned on but never lifted. But now I have reshaped that narrative not through bitterness, but through rebuilding. Grandma's home was being renovated to host support workshops for elder caregivers. The foundation had already begun awarding micro-grants. Maria was leading the effort, and every month we received letters from women who said things like, "You reminded me that I matter too." I wasn't just her granddaughter anymore. I was the voice she had once been too tired to raise. Looking out the window that evening, I saw Evan walking down the street. Alone. No entourage. Just a man stripped of illusion. We didn't wave. We didn't need to. The story was finished. But I'll never forget what it taught me. When people try to steal your truth, don't just fight to keep it, build something so real, so rooted they can never deny it again. You're not selfish for protecting what's yours. You're not cruel for demanding fairness. Sometimes the most generous thing you can do is to finally stop apologizing. As I tucked Grandma's letter into the rosewood box, I felt something settle. Not revenge, not pride, just peace. That's the real legacy she left me. So if you've ever been cast as the background character in your own life, this story is for you. Take the mic, take the power, and never ever ask for permission again. Subscribe to catch more inspiring stories. Your story matters too.